and welcome to this episode of ArtsAbly in Conversation. My name is Diane Collin. I am a woman with short hair, blue eyes, and glasses, and today I wear a light blue top. Behind me are an electronic piano and white shelves with books. This series presents artists, academics, and project leaders who dedicate their time and energy to a better accessibility for people with disabilities in the arts. You can find more of these conversations on our website, artsably.com, which is spelled ArtsAbly.com. Today, ArtsAbly is in conversation with Samantha Bassler, who is a musicologist, an adjunct professor in New York City, and a multi-instrumentalist. You can find the resources mentioned by Samantha Bassler during this episode on ArtsAbly's website in the blog section. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this new episode of ArtsAbly in Conversation. Today, I am with Samantha Bassler, who is a musicologist living in Brooklyn, New York. And Samantha, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for spending some time with us for the conversation. I would like to start with a question about yourself. Can you present yourself and also provide a visual description, please?
Sure. I'm Samantha Bassler. I am a 41-year-old female presenting person, and I have medium length brown hair with a little bit of a ponytail and glasses. And I'm wearing my William Byrd t-shirt from our William Byrd collection that we did for the anniversary of his death last year. So
thank you. So can you tell a little bit about your background? I know you're a musician, you're a teacher, you're a multi-instrumentalist. You do lots of different things, and you're a scholar, also a musicologist. Can you tell us where all that started?
Sure. So I started taking piano at a young age, and I just really loved it. It really I connected with it a lot. I was born with several autoimmune diseases, and so I spent the early part of my life in and out of hospitals. And so I think that music was a way for me to just like be alone and connect and not feel like I had to perform able-bodiedness. Like I understand that now, but at the time, I felt a lot of responsibility for, helping my family feel better about me, and there was just a lot of concern about me and about my being sick, and so music was a retreat, as were novels. So I spent the early part of my life spending a lot of time reading and playing a lot of music. And early on, I got really interested in a lot of instruments. So I had this kind of voracious knowledge for playing. And I started with piano, but I quickly wanted to learn guitar. So I did that. I wanted to learn violin, and my piano teacher at the time, who was a multi-instrumentalist herself and a folk musician, she insisted that I learn mandolin first instead of violin. I don't know, it was some sort of old school thing. And so I learned mandolin, and then I learned violin, and then I learned banjo. And I used to go to her, they would have these jams that her folk band would come together and they would play and improvise, and she let me come along because I was so into all of this. And so I did that at from like the age of 8. So I started out just really into music, but also really loving scholarship. And so that's what drew me to musicology. because I didn't like, as I got older, being in the practice room 6 hours a day was really isolating, and exhausting. And I liked that I felt like I had more control over my academic work, or at least that's what I thought. And then I went to grad school and I started having issues with being disabled at grad school. And that's what got me into disability studies. So I have because of my disabilities, I feel more comfortable being independent. I'm an adjunct and I love teaching, but I never really, I thought a lot about going into traditional academia, and it just seemed like even with accommodations in place, it would be too difficult. And so there's something about like people that are sick that don't look sick that really, like the people that are able-bodied, it really upsets them and they find it really difficult to work with. So that was kind of my ultimate decision, was to continue to be an adjunct. And luckily in New York City, we have union protections here. I have health insurance, and my salary was recently increased because of the union. So I'm not like most adjuncts. I'm actually making, it's still not the best wage, but it's not as bad as it could be. A lot of adjuncts in the United States really struggle and they work for really peanuts, but we have a lot more protections. So I decided that would be better. And on the side, I have a lot of private piano students and private voice students and private string students. And that has its own challenges, but it allows me to be more in control, so that I don't have to, spend less time up against the bureaucratic machine demanding accommodations. And that's what really I find to be very exhausting. And that was really the beginning of my career writing about disability. I actually published something while I was still in grad school about accommodations for scholars with invisible illnesses, because it was just, when I went in 2005, people didn't know what to do with me. And I wasn't even like that. Like, it wasn't really that difficult, but what they couldn't grasp was I would just be sick at a drop of a hat. Because I was diagnosed with lupus in my 20s and I had a kidney infection. I was hospitalized. It was just they didn't know how to provide appropriate accommodations. Like, you can provide adaptive accommodations, you can provide extra time if that's what somebody needs, but to accommodate a constant illness, we're not really set up for that in academia. So that's been kind of my passion project since then, is trying to find a way forward for people, that find themselves to be chronically ill. So that's me, and that's where I came from and what I'm doing, I guess.
Yeah, okay. It's really important because I think it's still not very well represented in academia, at least in the musicological world. The impact of having invisible disabilities as a professor, as a student, as a music practitioner, or someone who plays regularly. I hear a lot of feedback from people who have invisible disabilities and who still feel that the research is not enough, and that there should be more discussions about that.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So you were in grad studies where you published this article was in 2005.
So no, the article didn't come out until 2009,
Okay.
August of 2009, but I started my research in 2007. So I did my first graduate degree at the University of Oxford, where I did a master's degree, but that was actually not as hard to navigate because Oxford has such an independent system. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but you basically work on your own. And you occasionally go to seminars, and you occasionally, we went like once a week, but it's not like in the United States. And I think this is the same in Canada, where you have to take all this coursework and you have to go to class like multiple times a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
So So actually it was fine. And I was dealing with some really serious stuff at the time, but I was okay. And I managed okay without accommodations. But then when I went to the United States to do my PhD, I started out at Rutgers University. Um, and that's where came up against the issues. So the first 2 years were okay. I managed, but in 2007, I was diagnosed with lupus. And that's when things got really bad. And I had to sit for my big doctoral exams, the generalist exams that you take after 2 years, or you have to take an exam to prove that you know like everything about the history of music. And you have to sit for hours, multiple days. And you have to write by hand. So all of this was very difficult for me because I also have rheumatoid arthritis. And yeah, I mean, it was just like that kind of exam is really impossible, right? I can't sit for that long. And I couldn't, it was with a bunch of people, so it's not like I could get up and move around. I would write, I can't write for that long. My hands would cramp. I mean, it was, yeah. So I can't, so that was really, that's where the challenges really started. And that's when I realized that there weren't any, no, I was the first person, I guess, who had an issue. Like even in 2007, they were like, what is this? Right. So I had to get my rheumatologist to write a letter. And then I had to like, that's when I got introduced to the whole system of ability, accessibility, and disability accommodations. And I found it to just be, just not really helpful. Basically all they could do is say, well, you can take it again and you can have a private room and you can have more time. But none of this really addressed all of the systemic problems I was going through, because as like a disabled person having to constantly ask for help, and the pity and like it, rather than the whole system to be set up so that it was more accessible for everybody. And that's kind of the crux, So at first, my research just simply was like, there's got to be other people like me who are going through this. So I interviewed a bunch of scholars from around the world. And that's how I ended up switching my PhD and going to the Open University in England to do my PhD, because it's a university that was set up. It was founded in the 70s to be accessible for non-traditional students. And I met the person who would be my supervisor through that process because, he was interested in my research. So
that's interesting, the access needs parts.
mm.
You had to deal with that as a student, but as a professor, how do you accommodate your access needs?
Oh no, I still have access needs. Yeah, it's absolutely, and it's worse now because at least when you're a student, they're like, you're their student and you're paying tuition, and so they're like they're beholden to serve you. But despite the Americans with Disabilities Act, as an employee, and the fact that people say things like, oh, we want to hire diverse employees, etc. They have a limit, right? And that's like, they're like, well, you can only be sick so many times in the year, right? And if you need more than that, then we're just going to garnish your wages, or you have to do makeup classes, or I mean, it's this whole complicated bureaucratic thing. But the main like issue is we don't know how to accommodate people that are sick a lot. And I don't mean to like, deride my department or anything. Like, it's just that even working with the offices that are set to serve people with diverse needs, this is the only thing they can do, right? They only have, so what's described in the law and what's been negotiated through the contracts. So they have to follow our contracts, which of course, but I mean, the fact that there mustn't be disabled people involved in these contracts, or this would not be the case. I actually had a similar issue with being Jewish, right? I wanted to have like that's a real problem, being disabled and Jewish, because my holidays are not the same as other people's holidays. So I'm then sick, but also trying to like be observant, right? So that's like a double whammy. So then they really don't know what to do, because then they're saying things like, oh, well, if you need to miss class because of your Jewish holiday, well, you can just use a sick day. Well, no, I need all my sick days. So yeah, the access needs are still really complicated. And not to mention that it requires a huge amount of work. Like I literally feel like I have 4 jobs, and for like my main job, my musicianship jobs, like teaching private students, and then for my disabilities, right? They each have their own job, because I have to constantly document the fact that I've been sick, despite that I have, 41 years of this, right?
Yeah.
You can see
But
I have a lot of feelings about this.
yeah, but I also understand why.
Yeah.
And as a the creator of your own school with your
Mm.
own private students, did it make it easier to manage your needs and your accommodation? I don't know, schedules, hours. Um,
Yeah, I mean, because I can basically do whatever I want, right? Like, I mean, it's my school. I have a contract that my students sign every year. And in the contract, it says, I just tell them this because it makes it easier. I say, your teacher is disabled. We uphold disability rights in this school. And this person will be sick, but we will, make up whatever the lessons.
mm,
Of course, this comes with its own challenges, particularly since COVID. It wasn't as difficult before COVID. I don't have any research to back this. This is something I'm really interested in, but there's this fatigue surrounding disability and illness, particularly illness now, that people just don't want to deal with, like, oh, well, I'm sick, I can't do this. I've also done a lot of reading about, there's a lot of problems with people not like with attendance issues in schools. So I think parents, like their teachers are often absent. I just think the ever since COVID, our society has really changed in that now we are less likely to go to work or school when we're sick, but we don't have, which is good, I think, but we don't have any fail safes for how to deal with that. So what do you do when you have a teacher that is sick? There's a lot of sick students and you have a teacher that's sick. How do you deal with having substitutes? There needs to be more systemic institutional ways of dealing with this. So it kind of filters down to me as a private teacher. So I think that people are just really tired of having to accommodate constantly illness ever since COVID. There's more and more people that are ill. But obviously it does give me, as the fact that I own my school, I can do what I want. I do have autonomy. I just have to find ways of navigating that with these people that, I love and respect. And yet I need my accommodations.
mhm.
Yeah.
I want to go back to your research, your research as a musicologist. You mentioned that you had to switch to another university and also change topic. What's where your different research fields in this research you did?
Okay. So my PhD was actually not at all on anything with disability. It's about the London Magical Society. Like I said, I'm a bird scholar. I just published a book, co-edited volume with some friends, but William Byrd. So I was really interested in William Byrd, and I went to the Open University, and one of my mentors, Carrie McCarthy, recommended that I look into this London Magical Society, which is just this big library that was donated in 1954 to the British Library. So, like I mentioned before, we got the podcast actually started. I also studied choral music, so that was a natural kind of fit. And at the time, I had some, people were recommending that I have kind of like a series, for the people that don't understand disability studies, I have like a serious project. Like more like traditional musicology. But I was also really, I'm really excited about that work. I love it. And I still publish about it. So I did that for my PhD, but at the same time, I was still developing my disability research. So I do work in early modern disability. So I've written a few articles about how people conceived of disability in the early modern era. And that's kind of interdisciplinary. I look at literature and music as well. And then I've continued to do my more activist work where I try to, bring awareness to accommodations. I published another article that was similar to my first article about scholars with invisible illnesses. And now I'm kind of, I might be jumping the gun. I probably am talking too much, but I'm more interested in trauma and the intersections between disability and trauma. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
Tell me more about that. We're never talking too much.
Okay, good.
Never.
Yeah. So based on my experience growing up disabled and dealing with all of this, I started to become really interested in trauma. But I also have some other traumas that happened in my life. And so I just was really interested in kind of seeing what is the relationship between disability and trauma? What is medical trauma? What is chronic trauma, right? From chronically living in a society that is not built for you. So I got involved in trauma studies. I have a couple of friends that also write about trauma. So I started reading about in trauma studies. I started with domestic violence, and then I got into reading about medical trauma, like I said, more specifically, but also the intersections between disability and mental illness, because there's a lot of co-occurring disorders there. A lot of people, and that was actually really obvious in my early research, that people that are disabled or chronically ill often also have mental illness or mental difference, right? Where people have a huge amount of depression, anxiety, even PTSD, right? And then I got really interested in what is PTSD, right? Because our understanding of it is all based on veterans, but it actually, happens to regular people, right? And then I got into neurodivergence from there. So that was actually the topic of my AMS paper. And I gave a paper about the intersections between disability and neurodivergence and trauma. And I looked at different examples in popular music. So I would say my research is still evolving, but I think that in order to really understand ableism, we need to understand trauma. That's kind of where I'm coming from right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. And there is the trauma that goes with the disability, and there's the trauma that goes with the person, which also intersects, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's a fascinating topic. So yeah. I also wanted to know a bit more. You mentioned that you co-edited a book about Bert.
Yeah,
So
it was the anniversary of his death, the 450th anniversary of his death. 400th anniversary of his death. He died in 1623, and so in 2023 we put together a volume from lots of different scholars, looking his instrumental music, his some of his secular music, his situation at court, but it was basically it's called Bird in the 21st century, bird studies in the 21st century. So it's like an updated, how are people looking at bird now, and where have we come since, the 90s, which was the last edited collection. So that was really fun. I did that with my colleagues, Catherine Butler at Northumbria in England, and Katie Bank. And Katie Bank put together this really cool website, because part of it is that we're trying to also foster awareness about choral music, and try to, because there's a large contingency of public people that are in, just the public is interested in birds, particularly in England. He's kind of like one of my one of the writers in our collection says that he's the Shakespeare of music. So we put together t-shirts. I've got my t-shirt on now. It's got bird and it says bird nerd, but spelled BYRDNYRD. So that's really fun. And then I have some leggings. So it's the whole thing was like, we put this in a collection, but then Katie and Catherine, who are both in the UK, they also did a conference, a mini conference at Lincoln, where Bird was the organist and where he is from, and that originally, and then also they put together, you know, this website and this huge, you know, general kind of public facing, this is Bird, this is part of the, you know, the British musical kind of imagination. And that was also something we were really interested in, was the, you know, the relevancy of reception studies today. You know, do we care, why do we care about this dead white guy from, you know, the Renaissance? So yeah, so that was really exciting. It was a really fun thing to do.
That's nice. Yeah, I will publish the links to these websites and these projects on
Oh,
ArtsAbly.
good. Awesome.
Okay, so I have a question about um, what does it mean for you to work in the fields of accessibility in the arts, specifically in music?
Well, I mean, mostly I would say my main focus now is accessibility in music education, right? So I teach at NYU and at Rutgers Newark. And at NYU, I teach a lot of oral skills classes. And oral skills is, you know, for your listeners, historically is a very it can be a very stressful class, right? Some students come at it with, they didn't have a lot of, you know, really oral training for some reason, you know, as what in high school. And so maybe they know a lot about music theory, you know, music theory visually or whatever, but they haven't connected it so much to listening. Um, and and some people just don't have, like, some people have really amazing ears, like they just have a perfect pitch, or they have nearly perfect pitch, and other people just haven't had the ability to really connect, like I said, their intellect and what they think about music intellectually with how they hear it. So I find that, you know, one of the first things I noticed about oral skills is that it creates a lot of anxiety for my students. So even able-bodied students, even performers, people that are, you know, they perform all the time, they don't want to get up in front of a room of their peers and sing you know, a solfege, right? So so I was like, so I, you know, I started to become really interested in this because this seems to be, even for the able-bodied people, inaccessible. um and then when I started to do my research on neurodivergence, I realized that, for obvious reasons, you know, I'm a late diagnosed autistic person, and I also have ADHD, also late diagnosed. I realized that, you know, there's a lot of sensory issues. So for a lot of wide ranging um, conditions. So people who have autism obviously have issues with sensory. Um, so they have, you know, sensory overload. Sometimes it's explained, but even people who get migraines, and also how those kinds of, when that happens, that will affect their performance in their oral skill classes, but it doesn't actually describe their ability level in the class, right? So my main focus right now, I'm working on a chapter for a book on music and pedagogy and trauma. And it's all about this. It's about how we can create a more accessible oral skills class that takes into account, you know, without penalizing people. Because I was working with students who were just not going to class because they had so much anxiety around it, because they couldn't control their disabilities and how they might manifest at any given point during the oral skills class. And then just generally, I do a lot of my my syllabi are very much organized around universal design and learning. So they're set up so that my students have accommodations, but they don't really need them in my classes. Like, they're just set up to be accommodating.
Mhm.
So
which
Does
is
that answer your
nice.
question?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's
Yeah.
also this last point that you say that you talked about, it's really important, is if you build your class, your syllabus with the universal design and learning in mind, then we don't need accommodations anymore in the classical sense of or term of accommodation in universities. And that's
Mm.
a good lesson, a good lesson for some teachers who are still following a very rigorous um, model for their courses. So, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I know that in disability studies, when we get down to the real, the really intellectualizing critical disability studies, we have some, you know, I've talked to my colleagues about, criticisms of the social model of disability. And that, but generally speaking, I find that this idea that to locate the problem in the person, right? And that's really what accommodations do, right? They locate the problem in the disabled person. So it really is the medical model of disability.
Mhm.
And so we're trying, so it doesn't, of course it doesn't serve, because each person is an individual. And, you know, how your disability manifests is going to be so different. And the other thing is that these accommodations, so many times the people working at these offices, or even the practitioners, like the doctors, they're going by based on, medical texts or intellectual understanding, but they're not disabled and they don't really know how the disability manifests in each individual person.
Mhm.
And the focus is often on access needs, really obvious access needs, like physical access needs, as opposed to emotional, intellectual, developmental access needs. And so that's why these like just cookie cutter accommodations that people reach for, like extra time, it or even like delays. Even if you have an accommodation that you can turn work in late, there's always like an end point where that has to stop, right? Because you have to fit in with the medical model. So that's my real problem with it, and that's how I started to really change my thinking.
I see, yeah. Okay, thank you. I have a last question before we conclude this conversation. And it's about people who have worked with you, influenced you, maybe inspired you, maybe guided you in your career. If you have one of these people to think of, who would it be and why?
Definitely Joe Strauss from CUNY. He's the patriarch of music and disability studies. And he actually came to, I was involved in the musicology society at Rutgers when I was doing my degree there, Rutgers University in New Brunswick. And he was one of our invited speakers. We invited a bunch of, we got this musicology kind of colloquia off the ground, and we started inviting people. And my friend Justin Burton, who was also doing a PhD there, invited Joe Strauss. And I didn't know anything about disability studies at the time. And he gave his presentation, which I think was, I don't really remember. He could probably correct me. I think it was about one of his presentations on modernism and disability and you know what it was? It was late style. And he started talking about critical disability studies. And he tells this story. He could see the like light go on in my brain. And I was just like, whoa, what? Huh? And then I raised my hand. I remember raising my hand and saying, so invisible illness is a disability and it needs to be accommodated. And he was like, yeah. So it's his fault. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like the fact it's his voice, his fault. It's his fault for many of us, actually,
I know.
because
Yeah. So he started the whole thing, and he's just been, ever since, he's really been a champion for me, and he's been very supportive. And actually now I'm also very interested because he's been working on music and aging in ageism and age studies, and now that's also a new interest of mine because obviously the parallels between ageism and ableism are so apparent to me. And now I'm older, right? I'm like in my 40s, so I start to actually think about getting older now and what it would be like to age as this in this disabled body, right? I think sometimes people that aren't chronically ill, they just take for granted how aging, right? And like I've had friends say to me, "Oh, people are living longer now. We should really assume we're going to live into our hundreds." And I was like, "What?" I mean, good luck. I'll be happy to live to 80 maybe, right? Like I'm fine with that. But anyway, it's just yeah, he really he's a champion, yeah, like you said, for all of us.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation and for taking the time to answer to these questions. And all the best with all your current projects and everything that is happening in your life right now.
Great. Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.